Renovating an old house had always been a dream of mine, and when I stumbled upon the dilapidated Victorian on the outskirts of town, I knew it was meant to be. The price was right, and I had grand visions of transforming it into a beautiful home. Little did I know some dreams can turn into nightmares. The house was in dire need of repair, peeling wallpaper, creaky floorboards, and cobwebs everywhere. But beneath the decay, there was a charm I couldn't resist. I decided to start with the living room, stripping the walls and pulling up the old carpet. As I worked, I felt a strange sense of being watched, but I chalked it up to nerves and the eerie silence of the empty house. On the third day, I discovered a hidden door behind a bookshelf. Curiosity piqued, I forced it open, revealing a narrow staircase leading to a dark basement. My flashlight revealed stone walls and a dirt floor, and in the center, an old rotting wooden chair. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic. As I explored, I found strange symbols carved into the walls. My pulse quickened, but I dismissed the growing unease, convincing myself it was just an old root cellar. That night, I stayed late to finish painting the living room. Around midnight, I heard a soft, rhythmic tapping. I paused, listening. The tapping continued, seemingly coming from the basement. I hesitated but decided to check it out, my heart pounding in my chest. The basement was as dark and cold as before. The tapping grew louder, echoing off the walls. My flashlight flickered, and for a split second, I thought I saw a shadow move. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. Silence. I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut behind me. Panic surged through me as I yanked at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The flashlight died completely, plunging me into darkness. The tapping resumed, closer this time, almost in my ear. I fumbled for my phone, using its light to find my way. As I shone it around the room, my heart nearly stopped. Carved into the wall, directly opposite the chair, were the words, "Leave now." I bolted up the stairs, throwing my weight against the door until it finally gave way. Gasping for breath, I stumbled into the living room and slammed the basement door shut, locking it. I decided to call it a night, heading to my apartment and resolving to return in the morning with fresh resolve. The next day, I arrived armed with determination and a heavy-duty flashlight. The basement door remained locked, and I told myself I'd imagined the whole thing, a product of exhaustion and an overactive imagination. I threw myself into work, stripping wallpaper in the upstairs bedrooms. By afternoon, I'd almost forgotten the incident. Then, as I peeled away a particularly stubborn section of wallpaper, I uncovered a small, grimy mirror embedded in the wall. As I wiped away the grime, my reflection stared back at me, pale and wide-eyed. But then, behind me in the reflection, a shadowy figure appeared, growing clearer until I could make out its gaunt face and hollow eyes. I spun around, but the room was empty. My hand shook as I backed away from the mirror. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet, and I could see my breath in the air. The shadowy figure appeared again in the mirror, this time with an expression of malevolent glee. It raised a hand and pointed directly at me. I fled the room, heart pounding, and nearly tripped down the stairs. As I reached the living room, the air grew thick with an oppressive energy. The furniture I'd carefully arranged was now in disarray, and the walls were scratched with deep gouges. In the center of the room, the old wooden chair from the basement now sat, as if it had always been there. Desperation took over. I grabbed my tools, ready to leave for good, when a voice, low and raspy, whispered my name. "Leave now or stay forever," it said. The words sent a chill down my spine, and I felt a cold hand brush my shoulder. I dropped everything and ran to the front door, wrenching it open. As I stepped outside, the voice echoed behind me, growing louder. I didn't stop until I was in my car, speeding away from the house that had turned my dream into a nightmare. I never returned to that house. I sold it at a loss, telling the new owners nothing of what I'd experienced. But sometimes, late at night, I hear that raspy voice in my dreams, reminding me of the terror I narrowly escaped. The house still stands, waiting for its next victim, and I can only hope they heed the warning carved into the basement wall. Renovating the Grand Orleans Hotel was supposed to be my biggest break. The building had stood abandoned for decades, a forgotten relic of a bygone era. When I first walked through its grand lobby, I could almost hear the echoes of 1,000 conversations, the laughter, and the music. It was an architectural masterpiece that deserved to be brought back to life. But as I soon learned, some things are better left undisturbed. The renovation began smoothly enough. My team and I started by stripping away the layers of dust and grime, revealing the beauty beneath. But it didn't take long for strange things to start happening. Tools went missing, only to reappear in places we had already checked. Unexplained cold spots left us shivering, even though the heating system was brand new. One evening, as I worked late in the lobby, I heard the unmistakable sound of a piano playing. The notes were soft and melancholic, filling the empty space with an eerie beauty. I followed the sound to the grand ballroom, where the hotel's once luxurious Steinway grand piano stood. But as I entered the room, the music stopped, and the piano lid was closed. I was alone. Shaking off the chill that crept up my spine, I convinced myself it was just my imagination. But the next night, it happened again. This time, I was prepared. I approached the piano quietly, my phone's flashlight cutting through the darkness. The lid was open and the keys were moving as if played by invisible hands. My breath caught in my throat, and when the music abruptly ceased, I felt a presence behind me. I turned, but no one was there. Determined to get to the bottom of these occurrences, I started digging into the hotel's history. I discovered that the Grand Orleans had been the site of a tragic fire in the 1920s, which had claimed the lives of several guests and staff. Among the victims was a young pianist named Eleanor, who had been performing in the ballroom when the fire broke out. Her body was never found, and rumors of her ghost haunting the hotel had persisted ever since. The next day, I shared my findings with my team. They laughed it off, but I could see the unease in their eyes. We pressed on with the renovation, but the strange events only escalated. Lights flickered, shadows moved where no one stood, and whispers filled the air when the rooms were empty. One night after the crew had left, I decided to confront whatever was haunting the hotel. Armed with a flashlight and a sense of determination, I headed to the ballroom. The air was thick with anticipation, and I could feel eyes on me as I approached the piano. "Eleanor," I called out, my voice echoing in the vast room. "If you're here, show yourself." For a moment, there was only silence. Then, the temperature dropped, and a figure began to materialize before me. She was translucent, her form shimmering in the dim light. Her eyes were sad, and she looked directly at me. "Why are you here?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't speak, but images flooded my mind. Flashes of the fire, the panic, and her desperate attempt to save her beloved piano. Her sorrow was overwhelming, and I realized she was trapped, bound to the place of her death. "I want to help you," I said. "What can I do?" The images shifted to the basement, where the remains of the old boiler room lay untouched. I understood then that her body, or what was left of it, was still there, buried under the rubble. She needed to be found, to be given a proper resting place. The next day, I convinced the crew to excavate the basement. We worked tirelessly, and as the hours passed, we uncovered the charred remains of what had once been a beautiful piano. Among the ashes and debris, we found a small locket with Eleanor's initials. It was enough to confirm her presence. We arranged for a proper burial, and as the locket was placed in the ground, I felt a weight lift from the hotel. The oppressive atmosphere lightened, and the strange occurrences ceased. Eleanor had found peace. The Grand Orleans Hotel was finally restored to its former glory, and its reopening was a resounding success. Guests marveled at its beauty, unaware of the ghostly presence that had once haunted its halls. As for me, I never forgot the haunting notes of Eleanor's piano, and the sorrowful eyes of a ghost who had just wanted to be remembered. Even now, when I walk through the grand lobby, I sometimes hear the faintest whisper of a melody, a reminder that some spirits never truly leave the places they love. I had always been drawn to old buildings, so when I was offered the job to renovate St. Vincent's Church, I jumped at the chance. Nestled on the outskirts of a small, forgotten town, the church had stood abandoned for decades. Its once majestic spires now crumbled, and ivy crept up its stone walls. Despite its dilapidated state, there was something undeniably captivating about it. My team and I arrived on a crisp autumn morning. The air was cool and filled with the scent of fallen leaves. We unloaded our tools and began our work, starting with the removal of debris and the repair of the roof. As we worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The sensation was subtle, like a tickle at the back of my mind, but persistent. On the third day, while clearing out the nave, I found a trapdoor hidden beneath the rotting floorboards. Curiosity piqued, I pried it open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. Grabbing a flashlight, I descended the stairs, feeling the temperature drop with each step. The basement was a labyrinth of stone corridors and small, damp rooms. My flashlight beam danced off the walls, revealing faded religious murals and statues. In the far corner of the basement, I found a small locked door. The lock was rusted and ancient, but with some effort I managed to break it open. Inside, I discovered a forgotten chapel, its air thick with the scent of mildew and decay. At the center of the room stood an altar, covered in dust and cobwebs. Behind it hung a large, tattered tapestry depicting a scene of angels and demons locked in battle. As I approached the altar, I felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread. My flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Then, I heard it, a whisper, soft and unintelligible, but unmistakably human. I swung the beam of my flashlight around, but I was alone. The whisper grew louder, more insistent, filling my head with a cacophony of voices. I backed out of the chapel, slammed the door shut, and fled up the stairs, heart pounding. I decided to keep the discovery to myself, not wanting to alarm my team. But as the days passed, the strange occurrences intensified. Tools went missing, only to reappear in odd places. The air grew colder, even though the heating system was fully operational. And at night, when the church was empty, I heard footsteps echoing through the halls. One evening, I stayed late to finish some paperwork. The church was eerily silent. The only sound, the rustle of leaves against the stained glass windows. As I sat at my makeshift desk, I felt a presence behind me. Slowly, I turned around but saw nothing. Shaking off the unease, I went back to my work. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out, plunging me into darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight and turned it on, the beam cutting through the blackness. Then I saw it. A figure, standing at the far end of the nave, shrouded in shadow. My breath caught in my throat as the figure began to move towards me, its footsteps echoing in the empty space. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. The figure stopped just beyond the reach of my flashlight. I could make out the shape of a man, tall and thin, with eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness. He raised a hand, pointing towards the basement. "You shouldn't have come here," he whispered, his voice a low, menacing growl. I backed away, my heart racing. The figure vanished, leaving me alone in the dark. I gathered my things and left the church, vowing to return in the morning with my team. But sleep eluded me that night, my mind replaying the encounter over and over. The next day, I told my team about the basement and the figure I had seen. We decided to investigate together, hoping to put our fears to rest. As we descended the stairs, the air grew colder, and the whispers returned, filling the narrow corridors with their sinister murmurings. We reached the locked chapel door and found it ajar. Inside, the air was thick with a sense of malevolence. The altar, once dusty and forgotten, now seemed to pulse with a dark energy. The tapestry behind it had changed, the angels now appearing defeated, their faces twisted in agony. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind us and the temperature plummeted. A figure emerged from the shadows, the same one I had seen the night before. It moved towards us, its eyes glowing with an unholy light. "You should have left," it hissed, its voice echoing in the confined space. Panic set in as we tried to escape, but the door wouldn't budge. The figure reached out, and I felt a cold, clammy hand on my shoulder. My vision blurred and the room spun around me. When I came to, I was lying outside the church, my team beside me. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the ground. We never spoke of what happened in that basement, but we all agreed to leave the renovation unfinished. St. Vincent's Church was never completed, and it stands as a silent testament to the horrors we encountered within its walls.